and today we're diving into the world of AI and discrimination.
When we're addressing this term, we usually refer to mainly the sociocultural biases that can be seen in a certain data set. In facial recognition systems that were based on AI algorithms, there was skin-driven biases that actually made the police officers judge more severely any suspects of darker skin. The biases might reinforce the Western thinking.
These biases can cause violent riots eventually. They can lead to clashes, to fights, because people would eventually stand to protect their dignity.
We cannot just let the market regulate itself. It's not working properly. There are too many things happening, and we don't really know what happens when things go wrong in a more drastic way.
Hello and welcome to the Ethics Insider series, presented by the Israel Association for Ethics in AI. I'm Tim Kogan, and today we're diving into the world of AI and discrimination. In this episode, AI discrimination unmasked, the hidden bias in AI systems, we'll explore how AI can sometimes be unfair and the ethical challenges that comes with it. Joining me today is Maya Sherman. Maya is AI policy researcher and ethicist. Maya is also AI literacy project lead at Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence. Maya is also a team member of our association Scientific Council. And Maya also has her degree from University of Oxford, and also she's a scholar at Weidenfels-Hoffmann. Hi, Maya. How are you today?
I'm wonderful. Wonderful to be here, Tim. Many thanks for the invite.
Our pleasure, of course. Maya, you had an impressive journey in AI policy and ethics across countries, cultures, and continents. Before we dive in, I'm curious to hear your origin story. How did you end up, dedicating your life's work to the intersection of AI and ethics?
Funny enough, I had a very different beginning, and I think it took me a few years to understand how to combine both fields. I started with cybersecurity, actually. So I used to work with government, especially in Latin America, on anti-fraud tools and how to actually use WebInt and OSINT tools to make sure that we're able to guarantee the safety of users. And when I started this, AI, of course, was there, but it still took a smaller portion, and the words ethics and transparency, I guess, were still more academic. And for me, I think that I felt that I was looking for something that will empower users rather than put them in the same cycle of hackers versus victims. And I started actually academically. It was in 2021. I started researching more on everything connected to data ethics, read the first studies of Oxford Internet Institute, and tried to see what places actually use AI for these purposes, trying to see if AI can be harnessed for social purposes. And I found a company called HiredScore, which is an HR tech company. So I started with AI for Good, try to combine both academic research, but then also trying to see how it can actually be applied in businesses. And I think that from this going forward, I try to look for the places that use AI and are not afraid of it, but in the same time understand that we have to design social and ethical principles that will allow us to make this, first of all, commercial, but more than anything, responsible and fair for society. So this was kind of the beginning. And from that, I continued to different companies, went to Oxford, and pivoted a bit more to climate AI and ESG, which is more of my focus today.
Gotcha. So from cybersecurity to AI ethics, I mean, interesting. I know that you spent some time across continents. Could you just get us familiar with that experience? It's
Definitely.
really interesting.
Yeah, so I grew most of my life in Israel, but and I think it's true for many tech positions, we always need to work also on the collaboration with other countries. So I was leading um, the government collaboration between Israel and Latin America back then when it comes to cyber incident response. And Israel was guiding and mentoring the entire scheme. So I was working a bit with Latin American governments and financial institutions, still from Israel. Um, Following that, I got to work a bit more in the European landscape. After Oxford, worked in different companies in the UK and quite crucial and essential times of the steps before the EU AI Act and how actually policymakers and regulators are about to make this document to something substantial and feasible. And a few months ago, I decided to take this cross-cultural exchange to the next stage, I guess, and I relocated to India.
Mhm.
And for me, I think that it's always been part of my vision, that I believe that technology is interpreted and delivered in different ways and serves different meanings across cultures. So for me, being in India, I'm very privileged to see the other side of technologies and especially AI, um, specifically more in the climate space. And I hope to keep on going to different places, different continents, and always be exposed to the way that people understand technology, and more interestingly, how technology also help us shape some cultural values and phenomena that we're living in. So whether it's in India or somewhere else, maybe I'll jump to the US at some point. But in the meantime, I think it's been quite a fascinating and interesting journey for me to see how AI is being developed across different people in different countries. So hopefully we'll continue doing so.
So you've been exposed to two major countries that have been contributing to the development of technologies globally, Israel and India, and it's fascinating that you were able to combine these perspectives. I suggest to move on and dive into the topic of our today's conversation, and I suggest to start with a major concept, algorithmic bias. Algorithmic bias refers to systematic and repeated mistakes made by an AI system that lead to unfair treatment of certain groups. So that was an academic definition out of the way. And now I'm curious to hear how you would describe in your own words what algorithmic bias is and why it's such a critical issue in the field of AI ethics.
So I think, first of all, I think that when it comes to this discipline, we have so many different definitions, and usually we tend to rely on the academic ones. When it comes to algorithmic biases, I would say I put everything connected to data errors or biases that can also be originated by the human developers or any other mistakes during the process that can turn the results to be slightly misleading or not as accurate statistically. I do use this definition. I think it's a good one, but I think that the important part that usually many are missing out is that sometimes we actually have errors in the algorithmic process that are not just human related. Some of the problems can actually be connected to the statistics behind the data. So it can be technological errors. So this is one part of it. But in most cases, most studies and most definitions, when we are speaking about algorithmic biases, we usually refer to all the different, again, errors or any kind of preferences towards one side of data that can be defined by almost all the possible societal factors, historical factors, cultural factors. This is broadly. And the reason is that AI is not autonomous today. As AI will be autonomous, I think this discussion will be even more interesting, because once AI is autonomous, how will we define algorithmic bias then? But today, because we're still seeing this strong connection between AI and humans and those who are actually shaping it, when we're addressing this term, we usually refer to the, again, or mainly the sociocultural biases that can be seen in a certain data set or any data output of an AI service.
Thank you. It's a powerful perspective. We'll talk about social consequences and implications, of course, of this phenomenon. But from what I understand, the two key drivers of algorithmic bias are bias training data, you already mentioned that, and flawed algorithmic design. Can you explain how do these factors cause AI to be biased? Can AI, if AI learns from unfair data, will it make unfair decisions? Do I understand it correctly?
So this is a brilliant question, and I think that it's important to also understand that it's a very complex process. I mean, usually when we're speaking about AI, we're speaking about the black box model and a lot of different aspects to that, but it mainly means that there is a very complex algorithmic process happening. It's almost like a domino chain, if we're thinking of it. Sometimes we might drop one piece and it can shape completely the entire building. And that's the way I usually tend to see the AI and the algorithmic process behind. So if we're thinking of it, once I put I put some data sets, they have some biases. I did not put any debiasing tools instead. The thing is, when I try to map it, perhaps different than the domino building, I will not necessarily know in what point it might have impacted. So whenever I have any kind of biased output, either by the algorithmic flow design, and the algorithmic flow design is quite long, it has a lot of stages. We have the data sets, meaning I actually put the engine, the material behind, and that actually has a lot of biases. And both of these sources can impact the algorithmic process in different stages. And we are not always as certain how will be the output in the end, because these are statistical outputs. But what we always need to understand is if we have the biased components in any part of the process, the end result will not be 100% reliable, or it might be, but there is a possibility that it contains biases. So as we advance and we want to make sure that our outputs are valid to be used, especially in critical settings or whenever there is actually public importance of the data, we need to validate that, first of all, we are aware what are the biased parts, and then, of course, to try and tackle them, moderate their impact. So these are two options. Biases can be everywhere. So there are so many ways to make this process completely biased in a way. But I do want to add something that biases are natural. They're natural in the algorithmic process, and they are beyond natural in I would say, in the human element and in our reality. So it's good to be aware. But I do not see a reality where biases will not be part of the algorithmic process. I think that awareness is key, and I guess that we will speak about it later on.
Sure. Wow. That example with dominoes chain basically drives the point home. Let's keep the tangible lens as we discuss, how algorithmic bias can manifest in areas like criminal justice, healthcare, hiring decisions. Well, I'm sure there you have some powerful real-world stories to illustrate the gravity of this issue.
So there are plenty and very troubling incidents that happened over the years. I think that the more interesting one actually happened in 2016 with the leakage of Publica, showing that in facial recognition systems that were based on AI algorithms, there was skin-driven biases that actually made the police officers judge more severely any suspect of darker skin. Wow. And this was quite initial in 2016. it kind of revolutionized the scholarship. Everyone was talking about it. How come police officers will judge more severely people based on their ethnicity? And that started to spark the debate, trying to understand, first of all, that facial recognition system is kind of a broad system. AI is the technique, it's the tool that helps us manipulate the data. And in the end, it's based on our own biases. So it took some time for the scholars to kind of explain this. But the threat was there. What I think was, again, a bit more advanced and came a bit more in times of COVID, happened in the world of HR and recruitment, which is a field that I think adopted AI so quickly, because when we're thinking of it, AI is perfect for recruiters. It can make the dashboards incredibly easy. Everything is efficient, more transparent. But then there were some very interesting tests by Amazon and Google. And we were actually, and this is very, very known, that we were able to see the ads that about certain positions, management positions, that were less seen to female candidates compared to the male candidates. And then Amazon and Google said, and quite rightfully, we are basing our data based on previous hiring decisions, and male candidates are more hired compared to females. And then I think that this one's a very interesting tipping point, that the AI community also understood that it's not a question of how much data we have, because we can use it and we can use AI to make it more efficient. It's also understanding that sometimes the truthful data and the factual data that we have will be biased. So it's not a question if we want to reflect truth. It's the question if we want to create a different society. So what the HR tech discipline did afterwards was incorporating the biasing tools that will make sure that we're not just using previous hiring decisions. In the legal system, we have plenty of incidents, but there is still a lot of caution around this area. And there are so many studies and debates currently happening of whether we would like to see AI replacing a judge. And there's still controversies. I think that myself, I'm also kind of hesitant. I think from the Israeli case study, and specifically in the legal courts, and I think it's a great question, because the capacity in Israel can actually be enhanced. We can take, the smaller legal cases, letting the AI to do the initial screening. But then what happens when it comes to life-threatening case, or in case of a jurisdiction that might actually put someone in prison? Do we trust enough the machine? And to that, I can also give a caveat, because in many ways, AI can get to more accurate decisions than humans. And still, we trust more the human judge than the AI. So I think that the question of trust is something that came up of all of these examples, that we still don't trust the machine as much, even though it can produce very interesting outputs and findings. So it will take time, but both in the legal space, in recruitment, as well as in medicine, especially in times of COVID, AI has seemed to be very beneficial, but still has some inherent limitations that I think we as humans are still digesting. What of them we are willing to accept? Are we willing to accept the fact that human biases will be part of each of these processes? And this is perhaps a more philosophical question as well.
Yeah. Well, I agree. Quite naturally, we might now talk about metrics. So, because it's very judgmental and to understand if AI system is fair or not, and there are various metrics used to measure the fairness of AI system, and two common ones are demographic parity and equalized odds. So, demographic parity, academically speaking, aims for equal outcomes across different demographic groups. And equalized odds which tries to ensure the system's errors are evenly distributed. So that's the technical framing. But I'm curious to get your take. Do you see the value in this fairness metrics, or do you think they're oversimplify such a complex, issue as fairness in AI?
So that's a wonderful comment. So there have been some leading studies also in the Oxford Internet Institute that were trying to examine this fairness metrics. And I will say the following. I think that these metrics are rational and make a lot of sense in quite homogeneous populations in which intersectionality is not substantially high. Meaning, when I have quite defined communities that I can characterize quite easily or that have some similarities and the data set will not have too much variances, then I think these metrics are quite helpful.
Wow.
So for instance, for the UK, and you will see that a lot of the studies in the UK definitely explore everything connected to creating those matrices and having more structured flows of action. When we're going to South Asia, the discussion is different. And I think it's an important understanding for us to have because in the end, AI is not just in Europe. And, even Israel, I would say Israel is a quite homogeneous population. And still, I think that when we're thinking of AI and how to mitigate biases, we need to make sure that this kind of metrics can accommodate different populations. And if there are some limitations, to make sure that we are able to say, okay, these metrics can be relevant for certain countries, certain cultures, not because of hierarchy, but simply because of how efficient they'll be to measure biases. So for instance, intersectionality in India is quite big. So certain vulnerable groups will live in certain areas, will suffer from certain things, that the biasing process will be much more complicated, especially as certain individuals will go from one community to the other due to other factors. And the size of the population is quite big. And this will be a complete different discussion than the efficiency of these metrics is, I would say, in a country like Israel. It is smaller in market, that there is a cultural variance, but it's still different than other places. So I think it's good for the studies. It's good academically. I think that when it comes to understanding the cross-cultural variance, we still need to have a more nuanced understanding of how we're actually formalizing this kind of flows of understanding and generally building this fairness matrices.
So from what I understand, the idea of fair representation might be effective here. It means that we make sure the data that is used to train AI basically includes all kinds of people, basically covers all the social groups, even tiny ones. And I think that might potentially address, the issue that you have just mentioned. But on the other hand, it's also a very complex process of collecting that data, setting apart different groups, and also, it's a very sensitive topic. Let's move on. A contrarian view I've heard about is the idea of fairness through unawareness, basically ignoring protected traits like race or gender altogether. The concept is that blinding the AI to these attributes prevents discrimination. But if you think about it, there could be some problems, right, with this approach. Can you explain what those problems are?
Sure. And first of all, I will say that the field of D&I, diversity and inclusion, usually uses this approach of masking. So a lot of the tools will actually mask some of these features, and then it's easier. But I think that just to exemplify the problem, I'll continue with this example of the HR. So this is usually done before a candidate was actually seen in the interview. So when I'm applying for a certain requisition, the recruiter will not see my name. It will not see my where I live. He will not see any other demographic parameter, so he will not be biased. The problem comes when I pass to the other stage, the interview, because in the interview, all of this characteristic will be shown once again. So I think that what the biasing through masking does, it takes a very specific portion of the process and kind of hijacks it to the side. And I think it's true for many other disciplines. It will not be able to be scalable on the longer run. So in recruitment, I can apply like this. But in the interview process, I will have to reveal myself. To advance later on, the biasing won't work. So I tend to believe that this approach is beneficial in certain parts, but I don't think it's scalable enough. And I think that it's also temporary in its applicability in most domains. Because in the end, in most public domains or services that we are engaged in, we cannot really hide all these parameters on a longer scope, unless we want to be identified as hashes for the entire process of service. But that's usually not the case. I think it's an interesting approach, been tested quite a bit in HR, but I think it's the adoption is also problematic. So for instance, recruiters hate it. So I used to work a bit on how to deliver this kind of tools, and recruiters literally begged us to never do this because it just makes the process impossible for them. So I think that in terms of the commerciality, turning this to be part of products, this approach is still a bit complex to implement.
Yeah. And I also heard about other thing that even if you eliminate those protected traits from the algorithm or decision making, there are still correlated attributes that can reveal, for instance, nationality or race or gender. Like, for instance, some names are more typical for certain ethnic group, or some place of birth can basically easily say that you must probably be of this race. So if you eliminate those traits as well, you impair the overall quality of the algorithm. So, and this process can be basically, going on and on and on. So that's definitely like a very controversial topic. Let's move on. I understand that transparency about how AI system works is often promoted as a way to hold AI accountable for being fair. And from an academic standpoint, it's kind of pretty obvious. So transparency allows for auditing and, scrutiny. But you've worked in the trenches of applying this principle in practice. And how feasible is real transparency given the complexity of modern AI algorithms? What are the limitations here?
The biggest limitation, and I think that we can split this question to before generative AI and after. Before, and I'm speaking on the more complex AI models, it was always known that the structure of AI algorithms is considered quite complex. The black box model, we don't really understand how it works. Perhaps some can say it's kind of similar to human brain, but of course, much less complex, but just to give this allegory. So we didn't always understand how it works. We don't understand necessarily how certain biased data sets will lead to biased outputs. And in some cases, it may actually lead to reliable outputs. There are a lot of questions in the process because it works almost sometimes randomly, or in some cases more statistically. And I'm saying this because this had a quite direct implication on transparency and accountability. And probably this is one of the biggest reasons why we're not seeing autonomous cars very often today or too commercial. Because in many ways, using the more sophisticated AI algorithms, we are not able to say where was the mistake? And who is the one to blame for it? So transparency is kind of entangled in it, in the sense that we're not able to show the process. We cannot say who is the one to blame. And if something goes wrong, and if the car hits the wall, we will not always know how to do this. But I want to say this with a caveat, because we are seeing a very interesting trend in AI development with the creation of simpler AI models. And I think more interestingly, the expansion of user audiences exposed to AI, which I think emphasizes the fact that we need to see simpler models that users are able to understand. So before Gen AI, most people who were part of this community of AI scholars, policymakers, they had to be more technical. Today, it's not the case. And I think this has a direct implication on how we will foresee transparency going forward. And I think this is an optimistic scenario. I prefer to be optimistic, even though I'm an ethicist, I guess. Because people are more exposed to generative AI today, they have slightly more control in the process, or at least understand certain parts of it. And I think this leads to the fact that even, I would say, in the simpler applications, people might be able to understand what led to certain outputs in chatbots. And I think this is an advancement in transparency. Now, it's important to say chatbots are such a small portion of AI, but it's a beginning. And I think that it will be very interesting to see how regulation, especially the European regulation, how they will try to put some transparency mechanisms. Will we be able to see more videos explaining the process behind Gen AI because it's simpler? But I think that users will have to learn more about AI to be able to use it. So I think that we're going to a more positive direction when it comes to transparency and accountability. And it won't be just scholars saying it's black box model. We have nothing to do about this.
Got it. We are now moving towards what we touched upon before, ethical, legal, and social ramifications of AI bias. And it's a very important topic, I would say. And from ethical standpoint, the philosophical argument is that biased AI systems can reinforce, amplify, and perpetuate existing social inequalities and injustices. Sounds terrible, right? And that's the academic framing. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts. What do you see as the most concerning ethical consequences of algorithmic bias?
I think that at this point, and I hope it will get better, we have still very lacking representation of cross-cultural data sets that are not in English. We are seeing severe linguistic errors across data sets. Even if we check now ChatGPT in the most simplest inputs, and I'll put it that way, I don't speak Hindi, I need to test quite well how the translation works, and it doesn't work as well in other languages that are not English today. And this is an issue. And it's an issue not just because we want to make sure that this is cross-cultural and adapts to our languages. There actually have been a few incidents in emerging markets where translation issues in social media platforms led to physical clashes. It happened in Myanmar. It happened in Brazil. There is a fantastic study of Robinov from 2020 that explored the culture of AI ethics and content moderation. And today, in India, for instance, there are more than 20 languages, official ones. There are more than 900 non-official ones. Wow. The fact that AI is not yet adapted to this cross-linguistic variance is a huge problem. Because if we think of it in the most basic sense, the biases might reinforce the Western thinking. If a user is relying on some data that appears in ChatGPT, it can actually sometimes be include some life-threatening data. And in the end, we don't really have someone to blame. So we have very lacking data sets when it comes to the representation out there. So if in the past we used to say, yes, we just have sociocultural biases in output and there is nothing we can do about this, I think that today, because there are so many more users exposed, this issue is much more severe, because it cannot be only efficient in English. Because if now there is an application that has some medical outputs and services, we need to make sure that it does not discriminate based on ethnicity and skin color. Can we ensure that when we have, in most cases, data sets developed by the Western development sector? I'm not entirely sure. We're still testing this. So I think that's the main concern that I'm having about the actual representation of data sets today.
So what you're saying, in addition to basically perpetuating existing inequalities and injustices, these biases can cause violent riots eventually. They can lead to clashes, to fights, because people would eventually stand to protect their dignity. And if they see that this dignity is embedded into a system that basically, serves them, they would definitely stand for their dignity, for sure. Socially, the argument that widespread biased AI could erode public trust in institutions or in technology or in government. That's a high-level view. But can you illustrate the potential ripple effects in society from your vantage point in terms of relationships between society and institutions, technology, government, or other organizations that are using AI?
The best example, I believe, is elections. We're currently seeing so many electoral processes out there. Europe, of course, leading currently. I guess in India, that's I guess where I am currently. We're currently finalizing the votes in India to see who will be the next party. But there actually has been a very alarming case study in Slovakia a few months ago, where there was an AI-driven deepfake that actually impacted the results of the elections. And this was kind of an unprecedented. I think we're still also kind of afraid to see what will be the Cambridge Analytica of deepfake. So we've had Cambridge Analytica before, but it was still very minor in its impact. When we're thinking of the impact of any malign actors using AI in electoral processes, the risk that we'll have certain factors just using deepfake or any other fake news, using AI capabilities to automate contents is quite scary. We're seeing this quite substantially in the current regulations and all the advisories released by the EU. There is a very strong emphasis on how we're actually preventing the use of deepfake, making sure that it's not being used in the public space. And I mean, there are different case studies of AI and other services that can be relevant for the connection between the civilians and governments and how they can shape trust. But I think that compared to all the different outputs that we are seeing, deepfake possibly has the biggest threat. And I think this is possibly the scary evolution of it, because for the first time, users cannot really trust what they see or hear. And this is something that I think is quite evolutionary in the way that governments and citizens used to interact before from an international relations perspective. And in the end, clearly elections drive a lot of attention. There are different actors that would like to drive for different interests. So the fact that it can actually be abused to distort certain relations, or to even, as happened in Europe, change electoral results, this is quite scary, should be taken into consideration. And it will be very interesting to see what will happen in the next rounds of elections, and if the EU AI Act will be efficient enough to to moderate some of these risks to ensure public trust and to trust the system in a way.
And now let's talk a little bit about mitigation strategies, right? And I suggest to switch gears and do it as a quick fire round on some of the popular mitigation strategies being used to combat algorithmic bias. I'll name the strategy and you'll hit us with your hot take if it's effective or not. Elaborate as much as you want. So, okay. Let's do the first one. Data cleaning and balancing to remove skewed examples.
Not always efficient. It's an essential part, but there are a lot of other components that can impact the data outputs.
Adjusting the underlying algorithms and models.
Efficient.
Continuous monitoring to identify and correct emerging biases.
Efficient and will always be needed. Similar to cybersecurity, we just need to be constantly monitoring any external noises that might interrupt the validity of outputs.
Fairness through unawareness.
Not effective on the longer run. Shorter term can possibly be relevant for certain case studies.
Enforcing fair representation in the training data.
Efficient.
Embracing fairness metrics like demographic parity or equalized odds.
Efficient for certain markets, especially Europe.
Maximizing transparency around how AI systems work.
I would say not effective because I still that we are yet to develop the ways to make transparency maximal in AI. I think we still need to understand how we're defining transparency in machines that work very differently than humans.
Setting incentives or different incentive structures to promote ethical AI development for humans, basically.
I think this can be efficient because incentives are key, but it's not enough. So if it's an ecosystem. It might be part of the way, I think, for us.
Wow, there were some rapid fire insights. Thank you so much. Based on your responses, what would you summarize the most promising and challenging aspect of current mitigation strategies? So I think it's pretty obvious that there is no silver bullet, right? And they all need to be used in combination. But what's your take on this?
I think, first of all, I think you've mentioned the more interesting aspects of the current mitigation strategies today. I think that all of this leads me to a belief that I have that we are today capable of creating responsible AI strategies in very nuanced case studies. The thing is, when it comes to commercial services, the outside world, we are still not doing this exact translation because it's not beneficial enough. So when I'm creating a regulation, I mean, I'm on behalf, assuming I'm the EU, I need to create a pretty massive regulation and I need to take almost all the case studies combined. The thing is, I wish that we would think of this differently. What if we will start a bit smaller and then go broad? What if we first of all focus on what we can actually create today when it comes to mitigation? Because even this fairness through unawareness, it can actually be relevant in specific case studies. Let's explore that and let's see where we're actually successful. And I think that's what we are sometimes missing because we're going so broad to where it can still be beneficial, I think, for most stakeholders.
So let's move on a little bit to the criticism of modern approaches to dealing with AI discrimination. And I think we touched upon pretty deeply the technical aspects of that. But I also want to talk a little bit about philosophical or ethical aspects of the overall idea of fixing bias. Some worry about technocratic control, where a few experts make decisions for everyone, right? And others talk about like ethical overreach, like playing God and adjusting cultural norms that exist for a reason, right? What are your thoughts on these issues?
I think, and I will actually connect it to the previous point I've said. I think that until I think that like for quite a long time, until generative AI, the entire ethical discourse was a bit too elitistic. Even the framing of ethics as a discipline describing AI.
Mm-hmm.
The industry was not so keen to do that. So
Mm-hmm.
industry called it responsible AI,
Yeah.
fairness,
Yeah.
complete other terms. And I think that's exactly the difference. I think that it started a bit elitistically because in the end, philosophy has a very interesting take to what innovation is, and not just innovation, generally to any phenomena happening in our lives. But I think that the very interesting intersection that happened here is the fact that this term was created by a bunch of quite core academics, people that are not necessarily heavy integrated in the industry. But AI as a technological term needed to have this technological and industry grasp. And the
Mm-hmm.
intersection, I think, created very interesting and sometimes parallel disciplines. For instance, ethics by design. Almost possibly paradoxical when we think of the combination of a very academic discipline telling to developers how they should develop and design their products. But it somehow works. So I think that this change in taxonomy shifted this from this technocratic approach of only certain people
Mm-hmm.
controlling the system into something that the industry can shape and give it a different name sometimes. And I'm connecting this to Gen AI because today, so many more users are using AI, and even in simpler forms. So we are seeing, I don't know if like to say a popular or more common version of technology, but it sometimes feels like it. And ethics here needs to take a much broader scope. It's no longer top down. Um, the AI developers telling us how it should work socially. Users are giving their own feedback. They give their inputs. And actually, I think when you think of the philosophy behind, it's actually a very special process that we are seeing. Because in chatbots, for instance, the users are also part of the creation. They help teach the machine, they enhance it. And we
Mm-hmm.
are seeing so many users today required to know what Gen AI is. So I think that we are going from this very elitistic form of AI ethicists, they are the only ones who know, they are the only ones who dictate, into something more, I would say, reciprocal.
Mm-hmm.
Users give their own inputs. They need to learn. They need the machine to be more transparent. And then we have the counter from the regulator that are not AI people, but they give their own takes for ethics. We have the developers. And interestingly enough, I think that ethicists are there, but they are a bit left behind in a way because there are new actors coming that are also trying to define what ethics is. And we are seeing today that there are so many discussions on actually fairness, responsible AI, which are the more commercial terms. So I think that's where we are currently, and it will be interesting to see where this will advance. I think in terms of ethics as a discipline, defining what innovation is in the modern world.
So, in a sense, you're saying that keeping this feedback loop alive and making sure that it's effective is the way to hold not just AI system accountable for not being biased, but also holding those who hold the system for not being accountable. I mean, AI ethicists and people, elitist group. I really love this idea. So, I mean, just maintaining feedback and users could easily say if system is biased or not sometimes. And that's very important to hear the voice of the crowds, so to say. So, but on a personal note, Maya, you are someone who is immersed in this field, and how do you reconcile this inner tension between striving for objectivity and impartiality, while at the same time recognize that the entire endeavor of ensuring AI fairness is fundamentally rooted in subjective human values and judgments. How do you deal with personally with it?
I think that the way that I'm dealing with this controversy is, first of all, accepting that we humans have flaws, and we're not perfect, in the sense that biases are a natural part of our day-to-day life. Striving for objectivity, I think it's an illusion in many ways. And it's also a question of whether we want this. And I'll give a slight example. When I'm watching Netflix, I want the algorithm to tell me exactly what I want to watch. And it will do this because he knows me very well. And he knows that I like my Bridgerton time and I love my Bollywood movies in different days. And if it were objective, it would have given me very random things. So I think that also understanding that biases are not always negative. They can be in certain cases, but I think that what made me understand that this is something that we should also embrace is, first of all, once you are aware, we as society, we become stronger because we understand our limitations. We understand what we can put in place. Because I don't think that we can have a world without biases. And objectivity, I think that's true for most of the philosophical scholars. They will say that there is nothing like this. Like, we'll always have a preference to a certain side. We'll always have a tendency in our thought. And algorithms currently reflect us. So they should reflect this as well. And we should help them to make sure that we accept the outputs and they do not harm anyone. So human machine teaming is and will always be the response to this, in my view.
I see. Well, I think it's a great reminder that even that if we strive for impartial, ethical AI systems, we still must remain self-aware about our own subjectives, lenses, and limitations, and as we humans. That's a very powerful take. Thank you so much. Let's talk a little bit about the future of AI, how we're going to deal with discrimination in future. So, and I understand that standards and frameworks for ethics are still developing, revolving. From a high level perspective, there is a push for more robust definitions of fairness, accountability, what we discussed before already, and transparency. But I'm curious about your vision. Where do you see the field heading over the next 5-10 years? How it's going to evolve? What expects us, like, say, in 2034?
Think that currently, I think that's the amazing part about AI today. There are so many new things happening. So it's even more exciting than what it used to be. I think that what we will see is more nuanced regulations and, more interestingly, more policy mechanisms on the local level. Now, this will not be driven independently, in my view. I tend to believe that we will see some problematic cases of AI abuse in certain public spaces, either in healthcare, either in electoral processes, maybe the legal system. Because usually, as in most cases, the negative incidents are the ones that awake us to do things differently. And because the chatbots are becoming so vastly used and incorporated in almost, I think, in so many human domains, I think that we will have to create some countermeasures, either in the forms of more local regulations or what I think we're kind of missing, enforcement mechanisms. How we create content moderation that is faster, broader, and more cultural sensitive. That's, I think, one very strong aspect that will take place in the next few years. Another one, which I'm working on quite substantially, is the future of work, which is very interesting. I think that there are so many professions that will have to do this adjustment. Some will not be able to. So I think that we're going to see new positions, new new fields of work, things that we've never thought of. We are about to see people that their entire functionality is to make sure that the algorithm is working accordingly. People that are their entire expertise is on Gen AI. That
So
their
basically, you're
entire
talking about AI judges.
possibly, and even I would say less senior positions. People that their entire functionality will be to make sure that the AI process in the legal system is working accordingly. So if today we are calling it QA, we will need to see people that specialize in QA for AI purposes. And that I think a different expertise that we'll need to see. There's been a fantastic article by Forbes on envisioning what different professions will be in the next 30 years. And I always appreciate there's so many interesting things. A lot connect actually to biodiversity and the climate space and how technology can be integrated. But I would say that with the current increase in Gen AI, most positions, and we are already seeing this, and I think it will amplify much more, most positions will require AI knowledge as a prerequisite. And based on that, new sub positions might be created, possibly perhaps less junior positions that relied on repeated tasks. So I think that the future of work is going to go through very interesting evolutionary phases. And as part of my role in India, we are trying to make sure that most professions still survive, even those the more traditional ones. But this requires a lot of efforts on AI literacy. So it will be very interesting to see what the next generation will do, what Gen Z will be interested to do, because they will be more AI driven and I guess oriented in a way.
Well, you already touched this already, but there is also the role of regulation and policy when it comes to ensuring ethical AI practices. And well, do you think the time for regulation has come? Or do you think we still need to wait a little bit until the technology become mature? What's your view on that? So should we expect more regulations, more acts, and more laws to come? And would you think it's right? Or you think it still takes, I don't know, another 10 years to wait until the systems are mature enough? They're sort of say grown-ups, and we can apply certain type of regulations to them. What do you think about it?
I think that we should never wait for technologies to get more developed. The problem, I think, in my view, is that regulation is already behind. I wish we would find ways to make some regulatory models faster. I think that, again, because of the complexity of regulation, the way that, there are so many geopolitical factors involved. It's not just the regulator, there are entire ecosystems, the arms race, very hard time to create AI regulation. But AI is becoming a very strong part of our day-to-day tasks. We cannot let this continue without having any entity accountable, without having any understanding of what is the procedure when something goes wrong. There were a lot of discussions when the usage of the app, the Pokemon Go, using AI. So someone got killed. But then there were a lot of discussions. Okay, so who is to blame? Is it the app? Is it the user? The environment? I guess some will say God. But we cannot wait for regulation to wait and keep this void. It might mean, I think that's perhaps the counter to what I'm saying. It might mean that the regulation will have some superficial parts in it, so it will not always be as rigorous or as encompassing as we want this to be. But when we don't have it, then there are those who will try to abuse this kind of voids. So we need to be, I think, faster with either shorter regulatory documents or any other enforcement mechanisms that will help us guide the community and learn from it as we continue.
Well, it's a very controversial topic because, as you're aware, the biggest stakeholders within the realm of AI they're basically against regulation. I must say. So if you think about private equity or venture capital funds, those who pour billions and billions of dollars into development of business models, cases, technologies, they are definitely against any kind of regulation. They motivate it with their intention to prevent for the creativity not to be surpassed or diminished by the another law or another bureaucrat. On the other hand, we have big tech players, those who make those technologies available to millions or billions of consumers around the world. And those tech players, even though they have more conservative stance, I mean, they kind of realize the need for certain rules, but still they would be more willing to preempt and bend regulation towards what they think is best for the market. That said, how do you think, the balance of forces could be equalized, given that some of the biggest and the most powerful stakeholders are definitely not big fans of regulation, while you think that regulation is already not necessary? How would you think these market forces could be balanced going forward? Do we need to involve government into this discussion? What do you think could be a role of associations like ours? What would be your take on this?
So I think this is because I think that perhaps different than before, that the big tech companies and of course the other entities that just wanted to develop without intervention kind of dictated the discourse of let's just not regulate much and we let the market grow. And we're also seeing some countries that are endorsing these views also today. But I think that what happened is that AI took such a significant role that we can no longer ignore it. We cannot just let the market regulate itself. It's not working properly. There are too many things happening, and we don't really know what happens when things go wrong in a more drastic way. I think this is exactly the place of associations, as of course the Association for Ethics in AI, and I think generally the responsible AI communities to create these connections between government, industry, the private sector, the other public sector. We need to have people from all these kind of places to interact, to discuss and understand what are the limitations, because otherwise it will be quite chaotic. There have been very interesting initiatives and ventures, I know also by Meta. Meta created Loop Labs that also try to create this kind of like industry ecosystems meetups of, again, involving the government, the policymakers all together and do policy simulations. And this was quite pioneering when they did it. And I think that as we go forward, also governments understood that they have to be part of the discussion. I will say a caveat saying that governments also monetize today from AI acceleration in the country. And they also understand what happens when there are repercussions. And I mean, I'll give also this to GDPR and previous cyber security incident that also showed government what happens when we don't have proper regulation in certain areas and there are actually some financial risks. So I think that governments understand the role today. And the way going forward is having this kind, again, of associations, bringing all these actors together and understanding how to create more, I don't know if agile is the right word for regulation, but perhaps more flexible regulation, or at least more flexible advisory for business owners, for SMEs, for startups on what they should do. What are the limitations and what are the opportunities? And I think this can bring us to a more scalable and yet responsible way of creating AI in the both public and private spaces.
Fantastic. Maya, as we wrap up today's discussion, I'd like to pose one final big question that bridges everything we've talked about so far. How would you define AI ethics? More importantly, why is it critical for everyone, not just experts, to grapple with these concepts as we move forward into the future? So why do you think Israel Association for Ethics in AI should exist?
AI is the hottest topic today, and it's
Sure.
it's so important because it's part of everything we do. It's part of everything we think of. It will become even more prevalent as we continue. The good thing about it, it will make our life very fast, very efficient. The problem is, it can also harm those that do not understand the full opportunities of it. It can push those that are already on the margins to even, I would say, bigger harms and bigger losses. And in the end, if we want to create a society that is, first of all, innovative, groundbreaking, and fast, we also need to make sure that everyone gets the chance to be part of this revolution. So I think that today, perhaps different than the past, no one has this option of not knowing what AI is simply because it's everywhere. But what we can still do is understand how we make this fair, more responsible. And this takes more effort, but it will help all of us be part of something bigger than us. And I tend to believe that as we continue, more and more people will trying to learn more about what AI ethics is. And it can be AI ethics. You can call it responsible AI. You can call it AI fairness, algorithmic fairness. It all comes up to something very simple, which is enabling social innovation at scale and enabling society to advance in a way that promotes people rather than, I think, stopping them.
Fantastic. Maya, I could not be more grateful for your time and for you sharing your perspective with us, your insights, your wisdom. This has been an enriching discussion, which deepened my understanding immensely, and I hope our audience's understanding immensely. Thank you so much for taking your time.
Thank you so much, team, for the wonderful questions, and looking forward to future engagements.
For sure. And thank you to our engaged listeners for joining us on this thought-provoking journey. I hope this dialogue has sparked new questions, new perspectives, and a renewed sense of responsibility as we navigate the ethical implications of artificial intelligence. Until next time, keep learning, keep discussing, keep striving to shape a future that empowers and uplifts all the humanity. Thank you so much. See you next time.